I want to start by asking first, how many of you have ever seen a landslide?
Like in real time?
Like in real life, like not just on the TV.
Oh, in real life, the aftermath. You mean while it's going on or at
No,
the aftermath?
just the aftermath, yeah. Okay, so a few of you. How many of you have been impacted by a landslide?
Wow.
A few, yeah. I've been asking this, so I've been giving presentations for at least 7 years now, and I've been asking this, and the number of hands going up just keeps increasing. And I gave this presentation, or a similar one, down in Tryon a couple of months ago, and almost everyone's hand had gone up. So it's landslides are something that we, as people who live in the mountains, have to recognize and be aware of. And that's what I want to do today, is to make you aware of the different types of landslides that we have here in Western North Carolina, show you some things that you can look out for, and some resources that are available out there for you. And I'll start with a story. Last May 18th, the area around Saluda, Tryon, that area got around 8 inches of rain in 3 hours. Do you guys remember that rainfall event? Can't hear? Oh gosh, okay. So the last May 18th, the area around between Saluda and Tryon got around 8 inches of rain in 3 hours. So you can imagine, that is a lot of rain. Well, this rain triggered dozens of landslides, and the type of landslide that we call debris flows. Debris flows are the ones that you see on the media that sometimes they call them mudslides, where they can start high up on the hill and they get so saturated with rainwater that the slopes can't hold the water anymore, and they flow down the slope. And we call these debris flows. This is a photo of actually two debris flows that started up here near the top of Little Warrior Mountain. This one came down first, and this one came down second. The sad thing about these debris flows is that when this one came down, it hit a house that was originally located in where this black rectangle is. And there was a couple in there. You probably heard this story on the news, Mr. and Mrs. Case. When the house got hit by this one, they tried to get out, and they made it to the garage. But Mrs. Case, she couldn't make it out of the garage due to previous health complications. So Mr. Case got out trying to go get help, and while he was gone, this debris flow came down and pushed the garage into the side of the house. And sadly, that took Mrs. Case's life. This home was built right in the confluence of where two debris flows came down. We as geologists recognize that that's not a safe place to live, but that's not something that everyone knows. So part of what we try and do at Appalachian Landslide Consultants, and now the North Carolina Geological Survey, we're trying to educate people about where there are safe places to live. Where, if you live here, maybe you go stay with a neighbor during those heavy rain events. Just make people aware that these are things that we have to deal with living in the mountains. Just like people on the coast have to deal with hurricanes, landslides are just part of mountain living. This is the mud and debris that came down. This is the Case's home. Highway 176 is right through here. So all of this mud is what came down from those debris flows. All of these trees, they were pulled off the slope. This is 176 is buried under this mud here, and the mud hit this cabin as well. Debris flows are the most devastating type of landslide that we have in Western North Carolina. Here's a map of some of the debris flows that happen. All of these little yellow squiggles, those are all debris flows that happened during that May 18th storm. All of the little red dots are other landslides that happened as well. These orange blobs that you see over here and some at the base of the slope, those are old landslide deposits. So those are areas where we know landslides have happened in the past. We often see that landslides happen again and again in the same locations. And so we know that landslides have happened here before and they're happening in the same location. The deposits are one reason why having landslide maps is a really good idea, because if we know where they have happened, then maybe we can be aware of where they might happen in the future. So why should those of us who haven't been impacted by landslides even care about them? Well, first off, we live in a community where people are being impacted. These are our friends, our neighbors, our community members. But we are also taxpayers, and taxpayers end up paying to clean up landslides or buy out properties that have been impacted, or repair highways or other things that have been impacted. So it's affecting all of us, even if it doesn't impact ourselves.
Jennifer, what do your color codes mean on those counties?
Yep, I'll get there. So the counties that are in blue, Buncombe, Henderson, Macon, and Watauga counties, those are the 4 counties that were mapped by the North Carolina Geological Survey during the first round of landslide hazard mapping. So that program lasted from 2005 to 2011. Me and my business partner, along with 5 others, were members of that landslide hazard mapping team. And in 2011, the funding for that program was eliminated. That's when my business partner and I started Appalachian Landslide Consultants. We were fortunate enough to get some grant funding to do some landslide mapping in Haywood County, where we've done 4 smaller watersheds. And then Jackson County, the county commissioners actually decided that this information is so important they wanted to fund it themselves. So we did mapping for Jackson County as well. Over the course of all of this mapping, the NCGS and us, we've come up with a database that contains information about all these landslide locations. That's what all the red and green dots are. So we know of over 3,900 landslides in these combined databases, some of which happen on natural slopes, so slopes that nothing has happened to the soil. Then the red dots are landslides that have happened on constructed slopes. So those are the cut slopes or the fill slopes. And you'll see we have quite an abundance of red dots all over western North Carolina, or at least in the counties that we've mapped so far. These are the slopes that we can do something about. Humans are the ones constructing them, so we can decide how those are being constructed, how the water is being managed. We know that since 1916, 47 people have been killed in western North Carolina by landslides. Over 90 homes and other structures have been damaged or destroyed by landslides, and that number just keeps going up. Last year we had several more. This year we've had several more. And as I mentioned, millions of taxpayer dollars are going into buyouts, repair, response, all of this. That's why it's important for everyone to know about these landslides. Since 1940, there's an increasing number of landslides on these constructed slopes. And I say since 1940 because in 1940, there were several large storms that happened. One impacted Jackson County, another impacted Watauga County. We have air photos that were taken the month after that storm in 1940, so we were able to map close to 2,100 landslides on natural slopes that happened because of that big storm. A storm of that magnitude hasn't hit western North Carolina since then, so imagine if something like that did. Now we have homes that are way higher on the slopes, driveways that are way steeper. These are things we have to be aware of. Many counties don't have property evaluation guidelines, so it's really up to individuals to understand what could impact my property. How can I educate myself about this, especially when buying property or building a home? And landslide insurance is not offered. So we do have flood insurance and we have earthquake insurance, but landslide insurance is not available, at least as far as I know. I know Lloyd's of London offers some. If you can afford that, then maybe that would work for you. But for overall, landslide insurance is not available, so the only insurance you have is being aware of what's on your property or upslope of it. Landslides occur on natural slopes and man-made slopes, as I talked about. Most of the time, they happen on steep slopes that are over 25 degrees or so for natural slopes. If it's a man-made slope, the original ground is usually around or over 20 degrees, so it's a little bit shallower. The geology can often play a role in where landslides are happening. Most of the time, it's some kind of water that really triggers landslides. It's either heavy rains saturating the soil. On constructed slopes, sometimes it's culverts that are blocked and then water flows over the road and then triggers a debris flow on the fill slope that wasn't meant to hold water. And there are a variety of other reasons that we have man-made landslides. But it's usually steep slopes, some perhaps poor construction practices, and poorly managed water. So I'll give you a little landslide intro course so that you understand some of the terms that I'm using tonight. This is a picture of a rotational slide. And I say that it's rotational because the rupture surface here that it's sliding along is curved. Up at the top of the landslide where the soil becomes exposed, we call that area the scarp. And the top of the feature is called the head, just in general. We have down at the bottom, we call that the toe, and often we'll have debris, we call it debris or deposit down at the toe. And then sometimes up above the scarp we'll have cracks in the ground. We call those tension cracks. So there's your Geology 101 lesson for the night. The types of landslides that we see in western North Carolina involve rock and soil. So we have rock falls, rock slides, debris slides, weathered rock slides, and debris flows. And I'll show you some pictures of some of these. So the first one, this is a rock slide actually in Tennessee, but I chose this one because it is a great video. So the geologist that was out there had come because there were some rocks that were in the road. The news was there filming that, and then this happened.
Makes me wonder, I'm sitting too close.
Yeah, so the geologist that was out there, she had just told the excavator operator, get out of there, because she could hear, she could hear trees cracking and rocks kind of starting to creak, and got them out of the way just before that happened. So yay for geologists.
Oh my goodness.
The next kind of landslide I want to show you an example of is a debris slide. And this one is on a natural slope, so nothing has happened to the toe or to the head of it. Up at the top, you can see this is the scarp area where the soil is exposed. And it started that this block was connected to the top, and then it rotated, the soil rotated along this curved rupture surface, and the trees just kind of slid right down. You can see they're back rotated where they used to be straight. Now they're leaning backward a little bit. So this is the slide block part of this debris slide. And then down at the bottom, the material's got to go somewhere. It's actually bulging out over the slope that was there. So these are some of the things that we look for when we're mapping landslides. We'll now move on to debris flows. And this video gives you a sense of how powerful some of these things can be. They're quite large boulders being pushed around by all this mud that is coming down. And this, I'm not exactly sure where this video was taken, but there's so much power in that rock that's coming down, in that mud, that really not much stands a chance when it gets in the way. The These are some photos of the debris flows that happened down off of the what we call the Blue Ridge Escarpment, and that is the feature where the steep slope where the mountains transition to the Piedmont. We drive down the Saluda grade, that's the Blue Ridge Escarpment. And right along that escarpment, we had several of these debris flows, and that's a trend through history. Storms will come up, the mountains make the clouds rise. As the moisture rises, it condenses, and then it starts raining really hard right along that steep slope. So that's where we're getting these debris flows starting very close to the top. You can see it scoured all the way down to bedrock. It's got we have some springs flowing through here. This is that same track that debris flow took down. This guy is about 6 feet tall, so you can see the material that was flowing down was probably 12 feet high. Just the mud and the trees and the boulders coming down. So it's hard to imagine, but you can see how much volume can happen even from an initiation area that could be only 30 feet wide. You can get just because it's scouring as it goes down. So we have debris flows that happen on natural slopes and then also on constructed slopes. This is an example of one where it started up here and water was coming down this drainage. The culvert behind there wasn't large enough to carry all of that water, so water started flowing over this road, and then this fill slope was too steep, and the utilities had been put right along the edge of it, so it wasn't compacted quite as well, which is pretty common in mountain developments. But this slope wasn't intended to carry that much water. So when the water hit, the soil let loose and then flowed down. Fortunately, it missed a home. There was a home kind of close to the drainage, but it missed it. Nobody was injured, and no homes were injured. I mentioned landslide deposits earlier, but this is also something, features that we map, and we do that using topography. How many of you are familiar with LIDAR? A few. So LIDAR is laser-based elevation data that creates a computer model of the surface of the Earth. And it's really useful in identifying the way that these landslide features can look, especially these large deposit areas. So when we were with the survey doing the mapping project, we mapped deposits as part of that mapping program. This deposit we mapped in Buncombe County is this big yellow blob that you see here, and then there's one coming up here. Well, in 2013, that was another wet year, record rain before last year. In 2013, my former boss, Rick Wooten, was called out to this site because this landowner, this homeowner who lived right here, started noticing some cracks in his front yard. And that's what this red line is. They mapped out a crack, and then they said, well, let's look upslope. They mapped out an area that looked like an old scarp, and then they mapped out this yellow line, which shows areas that were moving, had been reactivated. And what happened is that this landowner down at the bottom wanted a parking area, and so they put a cut in at the base of this deposit, not thinking that this could trigger something. But these deposits are made up of loose rock and soil. They're not very consolidated, so they can get reactivated if something changes, like cutting out the toe of the slope. So here's a bigger pic of the air photo. They put the cut in here. This entire area started moving down slope. This is the bulge at the toe. This is the scarp right in front of this person's house here. And the guy, he didn't know what to do. And eventually, the scarp got bigger and bigger. So the landowner, whose home was originally right here, just decided to move the house. It was cheaper than trying to stabilize this big slide. And it was good that he did, because the scarps, well, this was taken a couple of years ago now, but the scarps are almost 5 feet high where they were just 6 inches. So these things just keep moving as long as water is feeding them and gravity is working. And that's why we map deposits too. So now I've told you all these things, all these types of landslides. There are things that we can do about them. And the first thing you're doing tonight is becoming educated. So if you see this list of things, call a qualified professional to evaluate the site. And these include cracks in the ground, any structural damage, an abundance of curved trees, any activity on neighboring properties, and then consult the landslide maps and models we have available. So I'll show you some pictures of these too, so you know what to look for. So first, looking for cracks in the ground. That's a pretty good sign that things are unstable. This is a photo from this homeowner back in May of 2013, wet year again. She started noticing some cracks in her driveway. And she and her husband had retired from Florida, put everything they had into this house. He had some health issues. So she was going out there every time it would rain and covering up these cracks with a tarp and then uncovering it so they could park and then covering it back up. And she's like, okay, I can't do this anymore. And this just continued to slide. So she got one of her neighbors who owned an excavator to come and dig it out. And what they found was some trash in there and car parts. And because this was built before Jackson County had any steep slope ordinances or any construction guidelines, so they just slapped it in there, built the house, said, we're done. And then this family had to deal with it, unfortunately. I went back there last year because the Homeowners Association is having to deal with this slope coming down and impinging on their drainage, and saw that the scarps are continuing to get big. They ended up, I think they either sold it or they foreclosed on it because they didn't want to pay for, they couldn't afford to fix this. They left, and now it's owned by someone who lives in Charlotte who doesn't really come up very often. But the scarps are continuing to grow and impact their drainage down below. So if you see cracks in the field or big slope breaks, those are signs that something is moving. This is that same home. If you see structural damage, that can mean that the slope underground is moving. It can also mean that there's some structural issues, but it can mean that the ground is moving. If you see porch foundations, deck foundations that are leaning, sometimes that can mean that things are moving. Oftentimes the house will be in bedrock, but then the footers for the decks will be in fill. And then that fill will start sliding out, and that makes the porch detached from the house. Something to look at. This is some shims that had been put in because the deck post had started to slide down, and so the homeowner was shimming it up there, which works in a pinch. It does. Sometimes an abundance of curved or leaning trees can mean that the slopes are moving, especially trees that are pistol butt shaped like this one. Sometimes if you see one or two, maybe the ground is just creeping. If you see a whole bunch, it could mean that there's a larger landslide going on. Another sign to have somebody come out and evaluate it. If you see cracks in trees like this one, in this case, there were actually scarps that would continue across the ground there, and it just went right through the tree. It was the craziest thing. Yeah. I mentioned earlier the landslide hazard maps are available for Buncombe, Henderson, Watauga, and Macon. You can get those from the North Carolina Geological Survey. Buncombe's are available on the GIS, on their property maps. Jackson and Haywood are available on our website, AppalachianLandslide.com. We have an online map viewer. We also have a user's guide to help walk you through the features that you'll see and the models that we've created to really help you better understand what the maps mean. Here's the three types of maps that we make. One is an inventory of the landslides that we have mapped. At the Geological Survey, we created what's called a stability index map, but really that's a model that shows where debris flows might start on natural slopes. And then the third model is called Potential Debris Flow Pathways Map at the survey. And that one is really where debris flows might go. If they were to start on one of these, in one of these high hazard areas, where would they actually travel down the slope? I mentioned we have the similar maps on our website. I don't know if I have an example. I didn't put an example in because it's a tight time frame, but we have similar layers on ours. We've renamed them so that they're a little bit easier to understand. We call our map layers where debris flows might start, where debris flows might go, because we feel like that's easier to understand. We also have what we call a slope construction caution area, because we were seeing so many landslides happen on constructed slopes. We wanted people to know, if you're building in this area, make sure it's engineered properly, make sure the drainage is taken care of, because these slopes are where you can have landslides happening even on constructed slopes. So, in summary, by you having an understanding about landslides, that's the first step in protecting yourself, knowing where the resources are, and knowing that you can contact people if you have questions. I have business cards on the table. If you have a property that you're concerned about, we can come out and do an evaluation of it. If you have questions that the Geological Survey can answer, they have restarted the landslide mapping program. Thank you, Representative McGrady, for getting funding for that. I think the first county that will be done is Polk. This is what I've heard. They're potentially starting to work on that. And they are available for any questions you have as well. Check out our website. We've got information there. And I appreciate your time. So thank you very much.